Welcome back to Inside the Numbers, the Rock Daisy Sports Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Cody Hughes, and today's guest is Coach Kyle Jacksic. Coach Jacksic is the Director of Strength Conditioning at Charlotte Christian in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's a good friend of mine, and he is a really sharp dude. Let me tell you what. I really wanted Kyle on the show because he has such a passion and a skill set for getting injured athletes back on their feet. He tells me all the time that's something that he's really passionate about, constantly studying. He really loves movement. He really loves trying to solve problems, and his mindset and his skill set allows him to do so. In this episode, we dive down a couple of different scenarios, including a case study where he took a soccer player and got her back on her feet within 6 weeks with a massive hamstring strain. It's a really cool story to hear. If you want to add some skill sets to your bag as far as trying to get a system in place to help your injured athletes to still train hard and get them back to full speed, this is the episode for you. I really appreciate Kyle coming on. This is a jam-packed episode as we try to make it every single time we record. You guys are going to get a lot out of this one. See you on the inside. Welcome to Inside the Numbers, the Rock Daisy Sports Performance Podcast with your host, Coach Cody Hughes. Join us to unlock the secrets behind athletic performance as we break down the metrics and transform your collected data into powerful, actionable insights. Tune in for exclusive interviews with top coaches and professionals who are revolutionizing their training programs with data. If you love what you hear, please share it on X, Instagram, and YouTube, and tag us at RockDaisyAMS. So, Kyle, I know that last time we talked in Pennsylvania, which was really cool for us to finally hang out in person, by the way. That was awesome. I mean, my first time in Pittsburgh, and it was hissing rain and 40 degrees, and I didn't have a hoodie.
It didn't live up to Pittsburgh's a fun city, but when the weather is, I mean, it's the same thing. I went to grad school in Buffalo, and it's vicious in that part of the country at the worst times, too.
Yeah, here I am, an Alabama kid, thinking, you know, it was like late spring or whatever. I get off the plane and I was just like, what? I got to find like a Dick's or something quick. Like, I got to get a hoodie. This is awful. Such a softie. Hoover was making fun of me because, you know, he's from PA. So, but it was cool to finally hang out. And I know we had some really cool conversations. And the biggest thing I want to just learn from you is like, what's scratching your itch right now and return to play? Like you've come like so far, and it's kind of become a thing that you just are really passionate about. So let's actually take a step back. What really did you started to see that like return to play was something that you started to realize you were passionate about, but also saw a need for?
Yeah. I mean, I think all the way back where I was very injured coming up, broke my neck in 3 places when I was in high school, in a wrestling match, blew out my hamstring a couple times, like broke a growth plane in my ankle, like all of that really piqued my interest in the human body. So then I started shadowing with physical therapists. I shadowed with an orthopedic surgeon who was actually the first responder for like when I broke my neck. So I was seeing things more so on the front end from a surgical standpoint, and then the back end from a physical therapy standpoint. And then if I look at like my career as a whole, I wanted to find where we can have a place along that A to Z kind of standpoint where I know like one of our interns presented a question to me last week. She's like, where is the strength coach's place in return to play? Well, a lot of it's very dependent on who you are as a coach, where don't get in over your head. But also you need to be a part of that process. I saw a posting like, I don't even know when it was, but when we start taking exercise prescriptions from medical professionals, then we are going to continually miss out on human performance. And I know like Dan Foley has talked about like being able to learn from true cadavers has opened his eyes of how the systems work. And I was lucky like where I went to undergrad and then in grad school, like we were able to use real cadavers that opened my eyes of like, hey, there's probably more to the human body than the cookie cutter processes. So a lot of those has boiled down to now I'm finding a major passion where if gun to my head, if there's one sector of strength and conditioning as a whole, it would be return to play. Cannon School gave me an opportunity that was what I was going to be brought on full time to do, was alongside like training or return process. And every ton challenges me because it's not cookie cutter. You go to most physical therapy clinics, you go to most doctors, like it's very cookie cutter. Like if you got a strained shoulder, you're doing this extra
Thrower's 10, all that stuff. Yeah.
Then sleeper stretch, and we'll stim your rhomboids and send you on your way. But then it's also like, I think back on the summer where I'm able to have some level of return to play cases, specifically like college student athletes, where I got a girl who said, hey, everyone is telling me that I can't run, but in 6 weeks I have my conditioning tests for her junior year of Division I soccer. All right, let's go figure out how you're going to run. And then we're going to challenge you. And also having some honest conversations on the front end of, hey, this stuff may not work, but we're not going to say that we didn't do enough. So having that middle ground where a lot of the times when a strength coach is taking over a return to process, we can strength over a return to play process because can't go anywhere else, or they need more than just what the physical therapy clinic is giving them 1 to 2 days a week and then their quote unquote homework at home. So I kind of forced myself into those situations. And then I found a passion, and because I want to be challenged just as much as the student athlete wants to be challenged, where I don't want to do the bland things. I don't want the cookie cutter things. I want to be like, man, this is some deep level things that we're doing. And then when they actually return to that play process and the kid can look back and say, hey, if you didn't actually push the envelope, we would have never gotten to this point. It's extremely rewarding.
So let's actually talk about that experience you had with that. Was a soccer player? You said college soccer player, start to finish. All right. You had this challenge. I got 6 weeks let's talk about the injury. If you can, hopefully you can talk in, generalities enough that, spares her privacy. But what the injury, what you saw, kind of how you developed some type of model, and then what you did.
Yeah. So girl came to me. I was actually coaching her little sister at that point. And basically said like, hey, this is what's going on. This is where I'm at. I keep restraining this thing. No one's giving me answers. No one's willing to work with me. No one's willing to find the middle ground of like, hey, this
hamstring
is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to. Yeah.
Hamstring. Okay.
Grade 2, biceps femoris strain.
So when you say grade 2, I just want to make sure I'm learning here too. Like grade 2 means there's actually.
There's note said.
Okay. So, we just know that it's not like your slight pull, probably going to have some typical, like kind of going to go away on its own. Grade 2 is like, I got to show a little love to this thing because it's a little more, I guess.
Grade 2 is like, hey, on a hamstring injury, we're probably looking at 2 to 3 months.
Got it.
Until you're fully like, I feel good that I don't need to think about this.
But you had 6 weeks to get her ready.
But I had 6. So I go through the quote unquote movement assessment process that I do kind of with every single athlete, or try to spend a little bit of time, like when I'm working privately, where I'm seeing them move. Hey, how is the injury impacting them? And hey, can I find the root cause? And basically what was going on was I was watching her move. I can't find what the issue is here. Like she moves well, she's strong. I mean, she's got good length, like she's mobile. And I dig deeper and deeper, and it was funny because I thought back to the RPR system. And what I was finding was when she was going from heel to toe on her injured leg, she missed a little bit of that last little bit of extension. So when you're missing that little bit of extension, we can kind of find some level of rooting in the glute. So I'm like, okay, glute, boom, glute's not firing. We can, that's just a term that we use, like, glute has some discrepancy, just going to put a little bit more strain on the hamstring when she's running, which is the mechanism of the injury. So I go, hey, through the RPR system, I know that the glute is connected to the back of the head. I go to the back of her head, put some pressure in, and it about drops her to the floor. Came to find out she had a broken cervical in her neck back in a couple months ago.
Okay.
A couple months prior to the hamstring injury.
starting to have some light bulbs go off.
The egg scenario. And now it's like, hey, we're drawing Venn diagrams. There's arrows going everywhere. Boom, boom, boom. Let's go. So I got her moving. That day we had her run. I had a PVC onload. So like where we're putting PVC at the hip, we're letting her drive. And then when she gets to an actual, really what I'm limiting is what mile per hour is she going to be able to get to. So I'm driving. I let her raise the PVC up in front of her. That controls her speed, and then she's able to get in, like, pull through there.
Okay, hold on. Let's pause. PVC unload. What is she running on?
So she's just out on the turf, running in a straight line.
Okay.
So what I'm doing, so you see sometimes like we will put a PVC on the back.
Okay.
Sometimes we'll put PVC kind of in the hip crease.
Oh, so that will limit like how you can actually open up. It's kind of a governing system. Oh, interesting. Okay.
So if I let you drive, depending on how far I let you drive before you raise that PVC up, then you're going to sustain whatever mile per hour you got to when you raise that PVC up. It's going to be physically near impossible for you to get faster when that PVC is out in front of you or out above your head.
Got it.
So I'm teaching force at the end of the day.
Okay.
Which is the basis of any return to play process should be. But also giving her a taste of like, hey, I need to run. All right, let's go run, because I know that your hamstring qualities are not going to be contracting nearly as much at 12 miles per hour compared to 18 per hour.
So did that moment of, hey, I could run like this, did that give her some confidence?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Got
I mean, and this was in the first day where I'm trying to sell myself.
Right.
I mean, this person's going to pay me to do this. I gotta push the envelope enough to say, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to go about it. Explain to her, like, this is going to limit you. This is going to limit the use of your hamstring, but it's going to let you run, which is that's the basis of why you're here, right? So we did all that, and then just continually just kind of periodized at the end of the day, linear periodization, that we're going to span out her flying 10. We're going to span out the distance in which she does stuff, and then kind of deal with the injuries from there. So like we had flossing, we would do a body tempering, we would have some level of scraping done. She would go to a physical therapist for a little bit more soft tissue work. And I was communicating back and forth with that physical therapist just so that we were on the same page. And then part of it was also just the fear. People don't realize in a play process, these are extremely scary again. And this girl was the same thing, where she was just like, this keeps happening. I don't know why this keeps happening. I feel like I'm doing all the right stuff. So I was like, all right, let me chase you. And for 20 yards, I chased her. And where normally she would complain that her hamstring hurt, it didn't hurt when she was just sprinting 20 yards out in front of me when I was chasing her down. Granted, I'm not the fastest human in the world, but I'm taking fear out of it.
Sure.
So I'm taking her brain completely out of it. And just like, I just showed you that physically you can make this happen. Now, can you mentally make it happen? And that was about 2 weeks before she was going back to school. She got over that fear standpoint, and her return to play process was fully cleared when we sent her back to school 6 weeks, when the doctors were telling her it was going to be 2 to 3 months before she could comfortably even come close to jogging again.
Wow. So how often were you working with her? Was it every day? Was it 3 days a week?
It was about 3 to 4 days a week, usually about an hour and 15, half, depending on how she talked on the front end. Got to a point where I was just like, your parents pay me hourly for this. But I was passionate about it. She asked a lot of questions, which I will probably talk, and she was the end of the day too, which probably helped her, because she knew that, like, I was just going home to my wife, God forbid.
So all right.
So saw her consistently, and then on kind of like her off days, like we were just increasing her fitness through conditioning, through some level of like zone 2 work, zone 3, maybe some pyramid tempos, extensive work, and then let me handle the intensive.
Yeah. So what was the test she had to do? Was it a beat test? Was it like, did it have to do with any type of intense speeds at all? Like change of directions involved? Because part of me is wondering, well, that had to have been something you had to keep in mind.
Yeah, she was the most collegiate program will go towards there. It's either the yo-yo intermittent one, or it's the Nike Spark, which we can argue are extremely alike.
Right.
So it was getting her ready that hey, you're going to have some level of decel and decel within this rep, and you're to get it within a certain time, so you're gonna have to run this fast. This girl was not the fastest on her team, and we weren't necessarily going to try to make her the fastest on her team either. But hey, how can we understand pacing to allow us to go, and then have the confidence of physically your hamstring is good for you to go at a faster pace, as well as your conditioning is proper for you to push pace when you need to push pace, but also kind of win the test by controlling that pace. And a lot of the soccer players that I communicate with, it's a lot of like, I want you to just barely be crossing that line, because if we're barely crossing that line, we're on pace, and on pace is what we need to do, because that's going to stabilize our heart rate for us to be uncomfortable, but we create as much comfortability as possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What were you collecting along the way other than just trusting your eyes? Like, I know, were you using any tech at all with her? I don't know if you were using, because I mean, this is a very interesting case. I get it. Like, if you're body tempering, a lot of times it's hey, how do you feel? Body language. You're watching gait analysis. Is she gimping a little bit? Is she getting to extension more? Is that more of just like a trust your eyes deal?
So I mean, I would video and kind of like go back through and like slow-mo and kind of coach within that. That was a perk of being one-on-one with her. We would get laser timers out where we were trying to expose her to certain velocities, let her continually get faster, let her continually push. But if she said, hey, I don't have it today, then we would pack the lasers up and we would move on.
Sure thing.
My return to play is, like I said, it's not cookie cutter. I much rather change what we're going to do daily, because let's throw periodization out the window. Like, where I just need to expose you to what you need to be exposed to. And if you give me 6 weeks when we need 3 months, it's going to change a lot. So she allowed us to do that. We would utilize our output sports, at least from a velocity standpoint, inside the weight room, where, okay, I need her to be able to contract over and turn that thing over and over. So a lot of it was speed strength based. So making sure that we were in the proper ranges, from a BBT standpoint. But I mean, a lot of it, like a movement analysis standpoint, which we can slap quotes on there, it was a lot of coaching eye and like consistent video with her running.
Gotcha.
Because if her clearance is through running, then, hey, let's fix the running. And a lot of it was she needed to be taught how to run, because this is where kids of today are missing out on. It's just like, oh yeah, coach, I'm doing speed training. Like, if you're not actually learning the technicalities of how you can actually run faster, then we're leaving behind. Sure, I can a 4-year-old kid out there and say, keep running until getting faster, is your time. But that's going to run out pretty early on, if you're not actually willing to spend the time on the technical standpoint.
All right, so we've got two things here we want to go to. So one, I want to come back to speed, because I know how passionate you are about speed. You've told me multiple times you'd rather be out on the field than on the floor in the weight room, 100 out of 100 times. But that working with like this soccer athlete, you were able to go really deep because it was a one-on-one opportunity. All of your attention can go towards her, but half the time that's not how you're working in your day-to-day. And how have you scaled some type of return to play? Maybe it's modified training. When kids get hurt or banged up, I mean, oftentimes I feel like kids get left behind or pushed to the side, or coaches literally look at them and say, quit being soft. You're not hurt. Get back in. And if we can do our job to somewhat create a little bit, create a system to where we can give them a little more than that, maybe give them a little bit more of a journey if you don't have like an athletic trainer here. When you got that opportunity to really, deep dive with a single individual, oftentimes it's hard to scale that, some form of that at the high school setting, working with a lot of kids, working with a lot of volume. Have you come up with some type of system of being able to either progress or regress in the weight room? And how are you implementing that on a widespread? Something that you think that, coaches would really take from it of, all right, I got a kid that got hurt and I've got a lot of other kids I got to train. What can we do?
Yeah, so I think the basis of it, if I look at our system as a whole, we are cyclical in nature, where we're constantly progressing and regressing, both from a movement standpoint, but also just a stimulus standpoint. So at the start of each season for us, we start with an eccentrically based program. The lines have certainly blurred the more years that I've gotten into this of like, we probably need constant eccentric tension and constant isometric tension kind of throughout, where we would normally block ourselves of eccentric for 4 to 6 weeks, or isometric for 4 to 6 weeks, concentric for 4 to 6 weeks. Now I'm kind of more a little bit more constant and consistent with isometrics. But hey, we're going to be eccentric heavy because that's going to kind of prep our tissues. It's going to allow us to volumize, as well as what we know about just the teaching of tension. And then if we go back to even just Charles Poliquin's work, where we're going to have some level of hypertrophy are allowing us to put a bit of size on, put a little bit of strength, and then, hey, like, let's go make it stronger with some level of isometrics. And then we're going to stabilize those tendons. And then, hey, we're going to take the restrictor plates off near the back end of the season, and we're going to go. Because the body doesn't necessarily know movements. It understands stimulus more than it ever does movements. So that consistent changing of stimulus allows us to plug and play a lot better, as well as giving some level of variety in our programs, depending on kind of like what sport. So now when an injured individual comes in with that, is that because we are naturally cyclical, they're just going to restart that cycle where if we have a squat on the board, all right, people may be doing short range of motion. Some people may be doing long range of motion, but if you're a return to play and you can only be short range of motion, but everyone else is doing long range of motion, you're still squatting, but hey, we're going to slap an eccentric on you, ghost, and then we're introduced to tension. We're going to have that basis of tension back underneath us. All right, now we're going to make our tendons strong, where a lot of those injuries are kind of based out of. We're going to move kind of fluidity through the fascia, as what we knew now. And then nearing all the end of that, we're going to take those restrictor plates off. We're going to go, because I need you to be ready for the forces that you may be exposed to in the game. We have a really good relationship with our athletic trainers and then the physical therapists in the area as well, like where the final call of a return to play process is not that doctor's note.
Yeah,
Should never
100%.
that doctor's note, because that doctor's note is going to come way, way, way before you're ready to take a hit on a football field. So setting that precedent early on and having those conversations with the parents when we start a return to play process is really important, because they just want that doctor's note. But if your kid's going to get hurt next week because he's not ready, because he hasn't been exposed to, or whatever velocity forces you need him to do, then you're understanding where I'm coming from, where he's not ready to play. Just because this is quote unquote healed from the medical professional doesn't mean he's ready to exercise it.
Sure. Well, let's dive into some examples of that, where how tough is that to discuss with a sport coach that may have a player who really needs to play? And I guess that matters too, the time of the year, right? Like if you're in a competition season, like there's a huge difference between getting hurt in the off season, getting hurt in the preseason, or getting hurt during like, hey, playoff time. Because sometimes it's, hey, we might need to just bandage up and go, because like we got to go win, and then we can address this in a couple weeks. But if you get an athlete that gets hurt, let's say early in the season, and it's like, okay, we've got this long season going about, trying to keep them healthy. Or if maybe they got hurt in the off season and you're waiting on that doctor's note, and then all of a sudden, I had the same thing with a kid. We had one of our quarterback who got hurt, strained his hip, and he was like, I'm gonna be cleared next Monday. And I'm like, no, you're not. Doc says I am. I'm like, yeah, but going from 0 to 100, how can you possibly say I'm prepared to do this by sitting around and feeling good and then going back and doing it again? How do you communicate that to like the coach, and then do you have to communicate your plan? Do they automatically just trust you? Like, yeah, doctor says it's clear, but we also understand we need an exposure or like an acclimation period or anything like that?
So I mean, it's dependent case by case. Obviously it's the sport, obviously it's the level of the athlete.
Sure.
But our coaches do a good job of understanding what we are doing is in the best interest of the kid. Where yes, we want to win, but let's set a little bit of priorities. But then we also kind of need to have a goal date in mind. So like for football, we can sit there and look at our schedule and say, hey, we probably need to dial this back, because if you want next we play that national team, to the definitely not nationally ranked team we're playing this week, like we're probably better off holding out. So having that level of middle ground with our coaches and having that communication chain, knowing their sport is important, knowing the schedule of their sport is important, and say like, hey, we can get this kid back, but we're going to be dealing with this for weeks on end if we don't, hey, take Friday night off. So like our starting safety this year strained its soleus, like right before the first game. And so we had to have an honest conversation with the kid in the room with the coach of like, hey, we're going to sit you out because you haven't been handling your stuff right. But it's also let us tell you, like, we want you for the next 9 games and not for game 1. Because if this is going to be a snowballing effect, which a lot of return to play cases can be, then we're going to miss out. And then you're going to miss games later in the year when we're conference with state and playoff and everything else. So having that kind of consistent of like always being around and always being somewhat in the know needs to come from an athletic training standpoint, needs to come from a sport coach standpoint, like where I am at least trying to see our sport coaches on a consistent basis so we can have face-to-face conversation about our specific kids.
Yeah.
But then also the reciprocal is that the sport coaches are having consistent conversations with the kids of like, hey, if you got something going on, go talk to Jacksic and the athletic trainers. So if we're going both ways, because it is a two-way street, then we're working, we're meshing together. We're not stuck in traffic. But if we're just trying to get to this singular point and we're not all on the same page, then we're going to hit a lot of roadblocks.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. We had a kid, man, you're in the private school world now, so you understand. But we had a kid who is a JV player and played Monday night. Played Monday in the JV game, carried it like 10 to 12 times. All of a sudden, didn't show up to school on Tuesday, didn't show up to school on Wednesday, shows up Thursday in a boot. And we're like, did you go see our athletic trainer? No. Mom kept him out for 2 days because he rolled his ankle. Had a boot just at the house. So now it's been 2 days from communication, a self-diagnosis, haven't even seen a doctor, hasn't seen an athletic trainer. And now if you actually did hurt it on Monday, which we didn't even know at the game, and now it's Thursday, he's talking over 48 hours before any of us can even put together some type of strategy to help the kid. You know how frustrating that is? Like, when kids just don't communicate. Our head coach was just absolutely flabbergasted. I remember him looking at me during the lunch wave, and he was just like, some kids just can't get right, man. Some kids just refuse, because you got other kids that as soon as they get hurt, we get hurt on Friday night, we're trying to come up on Saturday, try to get some treatment, trying to get some blood flow to it immediately in the first 24 hours. That way you got a chance to play the next week. Man, a lot of this has to do with our kids, man. There's only so much we can do if they don't communicate. And I think that's a huge part in return to play in general.
Yeah, the precedent that we're trying to set a lot of the time is if you feel like you need to go to a doctor, you can go to a doctor. But I can tell you right now, what that doctor is going to say is 2 to 4 weeks of rest, no activity, and you want to be active. I want you to be active. Your sport coach definitely wants to be active. Your parents don't want you at home. So let's all get on the same page and maybe not go to urgent care for a sprained thumb on a Saturday at 10 a.m. because you got rolled up on a Friday night. Like, there's stuff that we can do, and like we can get on the phone right now and we can figure this out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, I was laughing with one kids back then. I was just like, we boot designers and orthodontists rolling in money here in the Charlotte area. Like, we just slap boots on everybody. Our kids just go to the orthodontist like it's their job. Like, it's just, and it is who you're dealing with, but we're trying to find a middle ground of, at the worst, communicate. And if you want to go to a doctor, that's fine. But hey, or better yet, hey, go see this doctor because this is who I suggest that you see, because we're already in communication. And then when the parent sees that, especially at a private school, like, that's creating buy-in. Like, if Timmy rolls his ankle on a Friday night, I'm texting the parent or emailing the parent Saturday morning, like, hey, we think that he needs physical therapist. I already sent a text to the physical therapist. They're going to call you first thing Monday. We're going to set up an appointment. And then, like, the parents are just like, awesome.
Yeah.
you want to talk about creating buy-in, that's creating buy-in, especially like where I'm 9 months into the position here. Like I need as much creation of that as possible.
Sure thing. I can definitely see where, because instead of trying to leave it up to the parents trying to figure that out, their lives are busy and they don't know, right? But when the practitioner says, hey, this is what happened, this is what we need to do, right? I've already lined it all up. Just show up here at this time, and we'll get them back to the field as soon as possible. They're probably like, perfect, awesome, sounds good to me, you know. So let's talk about, like, I'm just gonna give you a scenario and how you do it. So like you mentioned like a kid squatting and they'll say their knee hurts. Like, my knee hurts, coach. And I get it. Look, there's a lot of nuance to this. So is it, first off, you already have a lot of context of the athlete of who's asking my knee hurts. First off, like, who is saying my knee hurts? Is it, you know, is the kid that you trust and you know, whenever they say, hey, my knee hurts, your red flags go up and go, that's not normal. Or the kid that is constantly looking to get out of squatting because they just don't want to work hard. Like, I get it. But let's say it's the kid that truly red flag. Like, he usually doesn't complain about that. Say, hey, we're doing some squatting. Maybe we're in the block where, you know, we're trying to get some significant squat volume in, and my knee just keeps bothering me. What's the first thing you go to whenever they communicate that to you?
I mean, a lot of it is finding, is there a cause to this? So like this exact scenario happened, what was it, yesterday? Kid kind of got twisted up wrong at football practice. He's like, hey, this thing's kind of lingering. I've been trying to work through it, been trying to like do stuff. What do you think I should do? So where is it acute versus chronic? Is it like, can we pinpoint that? Did you wake up with that?
Right.
What makes it hurt? Is a lot of like the questions of just like,
you just roll through that pretty quickly too, right? Like, hey, all right,
yeah, I mean,
boom, 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 right there on the spot. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's find the middle ground as fast as possible, because I'm not going to try to like, especially like for the most part, I see these kids twice a week. You minute, we got stuff to do. We got to go. So having those conversations pretty quickly, finding the root cause, and then we have some level of process, and part of this is built in the big dome of my head, but also like communicating this with the interns, communicating this with the athletes of like, hey, I got this going on, this is where I go. Hey, I got this going on, this is where I go. So like we have prep plans that we utilize, that if you're patellar tendonitis or you got limited big toe mobility, or hey, coach, my groin's been kind of tight. Hey, these are the things that I want you to do. You can do them from home, takes no equipment, do it while you're watching TV, or if you got a video for class, like boom, boom, boom. For the most part, that clears up about 90% of like what we kind of come across. That other 10% is probably needs a little bit more of a hands-on, like, hey, let's bring you down to the athletic trainer. Hey, can Jack get this done today? He needs this, and then I can handle everything else. Because then the athletic trainer, same thing. They like those turns that were that phone, like, up, good to go. Like, he just need, can I just put him on heat real quick, and then like he's good otherwise. And then for the most part, there's like thumbs up. Yeah, let's roll, because they got stuff to do.
Sure.
They're busy.
Yeah.
So there's that constant adaptation, as well as understanding who you're dealing with.
Yeah.
What you're dealing with, what's the cause. And then, hey, this probably needs to be a bigger conversation with the athletic trainer, or hey, I'm going to wrap this floss band on you, so you just leave me alone, and then you're going to feel fine because it's going to work. And then we're just going to act like we were never here.
Yeah. For sure. I know. I think the biggest key too is setting the standard from day one, that if something doesn't feel great, that you don't just automatically say, I'm hurt, I can't work out today. Like, did you deal with some of that when you first started? Now you're only 9 months in.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Dealing with private school kids, there's a lot of kids that
fluent,
little
spoiled.
Yeah. The little bit of change is the end of the world. Where I had a conversation with a basketball kid the other day. I was like, dude, I don't care if you don't want to squat, like, because your knee hurts. You just go do iso split squats. He's like, oh, is that all right? Like, yeah, it's all right. It's been what I've been telling you to do for the last 2 months. And like, all right. He's just like, you're not going to like make me squat? I'm like, no, man, I want you to feel good.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not your enemy. So setting that tone, like right off the bat, was really important.
Sure.
Them hearing it from the coaches of like, hey, this is what we're trying to do. This is where we're trying to go. And then being able to circle kind of like in front of the parents at the start of this school year was really important, where I was a January hire. So I had a couple months of just like, it was chaos.
Yeah.
Could take a step back of like, all right, this is what our needs are, kind of build it out this summer. That kind of started moving us in the right direction. And then now our attendance numbers are through the roof compared to where we were in January when I got here, and then the months before I got.
Yeah. Sweet. Hey, let's switch gears to speed a little bit. You mentioned earlier in the conversation, if you don't focus on the technicalities that are going to help you eventually run faster, not just, hey, let's set up the lasers and let's just sprint. Because I think a lot of coaches do that now. Since lasers have become so easily to access and it's becoming more and more mainstream, they're no longer some unique thing that only a few coaches have. Everywhere I turn, someone's got a free lap, a dasher, an arena gear, Vault, something. They've got something, but all they really know is, line up and compete. And that's part of it. I mean, I can agree that if you're not timing, you're not sprint training, which is, part of it as far as intent goes. But what are your top, meat and potato technicalities that you feel like high school athletes need to have in order to maximize their running ability?
So I think part of it is we teach the speed from the ground up here. And I know a lot of people have started going in that direction. Being able to teach how the foot acts and reacts in the ground, both in acceleration and in upright running mechanics, max velocity, whatever we want to call it, is really, really important, because a lot of the time our kids' feet and ankles are extremely weak, because some of these kids, their feet may still be growing. Some of these kids probably don't wear proper footwear. Have probably wore shoes their whole entire life, so they're not walking around barefoot. So when I lock them into a cleat, for example, then we're going to miss on a lot of stuff. So like what we focus on here is being able to flex the tibialis anterior. So we think that there's a knife on the bottom of the foot, and especially in upright running, we want that knife to go directly into the ground, because we understand physics and force dissipation. Dependent on the angle in which that force is entering is going to impact my body in the opposite direction as one that react. Acceleration, I want us to have that angle where I'm pushing, good strong feet, and I'm not moving myself backwards at all. Because where kids, like, I call it spinning their wheels. You see a kid go to accelerate, especially if they're on a turf field and they don't have the greatest cleats, and it almost just looks like they're like Wile E. Coyote kind of running.
100%.
I was like, you're sputtering, bro. Like
switch gears, dude.
Flex your shin and like, let's actually like push into the ground. And that's like another thing that we teach is push, not pull, push, not pull, push, not pull. Everything in running needs to be a push, because those sloppiest runners, those technical,
yeah,
are usually butt kicker heavy, and then their heels are way out in front of them. But if I'm making contact with my heel, then all that force is still going forward. So basically the opposite reaction is that I'm basically sputtering myself backwards.
It's like holding the acceleration and the brake at the same time,
Yeah, I'm with two for the most part, which is common here in Charlotte, North Carolina, but that's beside the point. So we're teaching that. A lot of it is knee drive to like where our kids don't really have the hip flexor strength in order to get up there. So we take one of my best, quote unquote, best friends here on campus has got to be our track coach, because I want to help his track program and I want the track program to help all of our sports performance. So we take a lot of track-like principles into how we teach how to run, where we let them get to upright. We get them comfortable in acceleration angles and everything else, and then we get them strong. Part of that is their hip flexor got to be strong, their glutes got to be really strong, and their foot and ankle needs to be strong. If we look at them, fastest, most powerful humans in the world, that's what they are. They got the biggest butts. They're the most explosive through there.
Yep.
Hamstrings allow it, and then boom, we're good. So then my weight program has to match that. We have high volume glute work, especially in a lot of our power sports. And then we adapt kind of like everything off of that. Like that's got to be the basis of it. But if you teach a kid how to use his shin, how to use his foot, how to actually stab the ground underneath, push, not pull, and then finish the rep is important too. Kids just sometimes lose their shape. We want everything to be cyclical. Having a cycle, we want to draw a circle the whole time, where something like a dribble bleed, which I know like Les does. And like I learn everything from Altus, where we're starting small and then we just build up as we go. That we get to upright running is really important. Where some kids are good on the front end and then they're terrible on the back end. Some kids are bad on the front end, they're good on the back end. Where you're just like, nope, you're keeping that shape the whole time, whether we're just over the ankle or we're all in upright.
Gotcha. So it sounds to me, I mean, you've pinpointed foot strength, which I think is probably one of the most ignored things in all strength conditioning. Everybody wants to train the ham and the quad above the knee. They don't really want to train below the knee, you know? So if you're doing some things in the weight room to help with some of that foot strength that's going to aid in sprinting, what are some things you do in the weight room to help with that foot?
Yeah. So we are spring ankle, position specific isometrics. Sometimes that weight is behind us. Sometimes we want that weight to be way in front of us, where we're basically looking at the difference of angles that the toe, the big toe specifically, is creating. Where if I'm shifting my weight forward, that big toe is actually going to bend more and shift my weight more, where in acceleration, we need that big toe in order to stabilize and take a lot of that force. It's a lot of soleus work. I think soleus naturally is extremely underdeveloped and overlooked a lot of the time in strength conditioning. So we're getting some level of that bent knee forward, soleus contraction metrically, and we're all that constantly just simple things like calf soleus shin raises. And then a lot of extensive and intensive pogos at the end of the day. We can say plyos, but I think the pogos alone, creating from the foot and the ankle and not from the knee, allows us to develop that, where classic strength and conditioning is knee-based, knee and hip-based, while the not-so-classic speed-based approach that we take is the shin down. So we're testing something like a 10-5 test, doing some level of RSI. We want that constant turnover. We want to be able to react, and then getting our kids out of our shoes, especially for volume work, position specific ISOs and everything else. And then caring for our feet too, where especially in season, like all of our cleat based sports are rolling their feet out with lacrosse balls, like walking across rock mats. Hey, go walk down this concrete block with no song. We're trying to neurology of that as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I remember hearing Dan Fichter speak at TFC about how they use like a spiked ball to kind of desensitize the bottom of the foot, and how that can have a huge impact on some things. That really opened my eyes, because I'll tell you right now, I have probably the most wuss feet of all time, dude. I did not grow up barefoot. My wife will tell you, like, if I've got to walk across rocks, like, you can just forget it. You better go get me some Crocs or something to wear, because I'm just like, golly, why am I so sensitive? But I can see where that can really play a point in how, you know, signals and all that when it comes to running and doing all those things are great. Traditional strength conditioning does not do enough of those things, and it doesn't seem like it takes a whole lot. Like, when it's not like you have to take out a massive percentage of your program to check that box, as far as like hitting some ISOs or doing some pogos. Like, where are you hitting those in the program? Is an ISO maybe a superset for a main movement? Is pogos part of the warm up? Maybe pogos can be something, you know, how long are you doing pogos for? You know, I'm curious to know some of those things.
Yeah, so pogos, and we'll probably take it into kind of two different parts here. Anytime that we're doing really anything plyometric in nature, it is part of the warm-up and then part of our kind of like first superset.
Got it.
So I'm usually trying to contrast what we are doing, where I wrote an article a couple months ago now where I talked about yin yang. So can't live without the other. So if we're quad based, so say if we're doing a squat movement or a heavy tension through the quad, then I want to contrast that with lots of like high speed contact to the hamstring. So I'm pairing a squat movement with a straight leg bound, for example, prime times, whatever we want to call it. So when we are doing a lot of our pogo testing or utilizing pogos and everything else, it's usually to contrast a knee based movement. So if we're doing an iso split squat, if we're in, we can argue trap bar deadlift, we can argue a whole multitude of things. classical lower body strength training. Then I want to contrast that with our plyometrics, pogos, quick reaction, everything else, where I'm taking a strength-based thing and then I'm adding or contrasting with a quicker turnover.
Got it.
It helps the brain develop. I think I know Connor Shep, who was at Liberty University and now he's kind of doing his own thing and kind of opening his own return to play business, talked about like doing rhythm-based things at the end of workouts, because if we're so barbell and strength training based, like the brain needs that fill at the end. So like he would have kids do just skips at the end of workouts and everything else, just to kind of re-foundationalize everything.
Gotcha.
So having some level of that, just constant kind of contrast with that, is important to us. And then finishing the workouts with some level of isometrics, where we're going to gain and we're going to fill that bucket when we're quote unquote higher. It's fine. We're not going to over it through isometrics, because if there's no eccentric tension on the muscle, then we're not going to create any level of soreness, but we're going to get them strong even though they are fatigued. So that's like the place in which we're at. That also allows us, like, they can usually take their shoes off for B because it's upper body based with some sprint isometrics. As a whole, like, we're looking at ground contact. So whether that's for time or how many reps, we're kind of just periodizing off of that and unloading off of that. So if we're starting with 4 sets of 20 pogos, then we're moving to the 4 sets of 25. Or I don't love time-based things, because sometimes the kids, like, where if I'm doing 20 pogos, I want you to be done as fast as possible. But if I'm just doing like bunny hop, creating from the knee rather than from the foot and ankle, then us doing 20 reps, doing 20 seconds, like you're gonna dog that 20.
Right.
But they 20 as fast as possible on a pogo, and you're actually contract feet and get off the ground. It's going to provide us more benefit. And then for isometrics, we're looking at a minute plus of total across the workout of that specific isometric, at least if we're just looking at joints. So if it's an ankle joint, like we can do a spring ankle of the calf and a spring ankle of the soleus, 15 seconds each for 3 sets. Sure, that's only 45 seconds per muscle, but we're still getting a minute and a half at the ankle joint and at the bottom of the foot. Which seems to provide us enough benefit. And we can somewhat periodize off of that as well, develop off of that, build up as we go. We'll have kids that can go as long as a couple sets of like 45 seconds in a specific sprint. Nice position.
Yeah, I think those are great items that any coach can take and just sprinkle in. I mean, we all have places we can fill in value. There's some things that they're not very coaching intensive, which is also makes it great. I mean, you got to coach it on the front end. I guess you could argue, you probably say, no, it actually can be really coaching intensive based on where the big toe is and things like that. I get it, but it's like, all right, once I'm there, I'm there. There's not multiple reps. It's kind of a hold and fight and stabilize there. So you can do those things in between. I think those are really great. Those are great value. As we're running out of time here, I've got 2 questions I always ask coaches. So number one, like what do you think is the number one thing you've changed your mind on over the course of your career?
The way I look at lower body development has certainly changed a lot, where I think you are going to get just as much out of isometrics and sprinting as you will out of squatting, for example. And that's not necessarily even, I was laughing with one of my former interns not that long ago because we were talking about the shred mill and everything else. I was just like, well, if I got a shred mill and I got dumbbells, that's better off. Like, I don't need squats. Where I was so barbell based early on. But then I learned more about GPP and saw the importance of it, especially with high school kids, being able to move. I want to create better movement. I want to create better movers rather than better strength people.
Sure.
Like the labeling of a strength coach needs to start to change, because I think the field itself is moving in the direction of like with a 1 rep max, or just like, I don't really need 300 pounds on our team strength if they can't actually move.
Right.
The amount of we play against in all of our sports that are so muscle bound and not tendon explosive, Like I'll pick our guys over them pretty much any day of the week.
Gotcha.
So that's definitely changed. Not putting myself in a box of just that like constant learning, constant adaptation, where I've certainly worked on some things, got some stuff, and kind of brought them back, benefit, and then I've gotten away from things that I don't think will ever come back as well.
Sure. And then the last thing I always ask is like, what is currently something you're studying or something that's really scratching your itch that you're like, man, like I'm currently digging into this right now and it's just really interesting to me.
Yeah, so I brought it up before. Anything from all this is super interesting to me. So like I know I just kind of signed up for, I think they're calling it the Coaching Eye with Dan Path.
Okay.
Being able to like learn from him, I think is really amazing. And then I want to eventually be able to do the apprenticeship through them as well. Because what the Coaching Eye is understanding what he sees from a return to play standpoint and movement analysis standpoint and how he can intervene almost instantly.
Yeah. Next level stuff.
Session.
Yeah.
I think being able to coach on the fly is a skill, and you got to be able to develop it and to have longevity and be able to do this really, really well. That's interesting. Any of the neuro stuff I always come back to. I was the lucky one, and you brought him up before, where my first ever strength and conditioning clinic, Dan Fichter spoke at.
Yeah.
So that opened my eyes pretty early on, and I'm kind of constantly kind of chasing that. So how can we utilize the neurology of stuff, especially as I dive deeper into our return to play stuff and true athletic development, and not just true strength and conditioning development. That's where my mind goes and where I constantly find myself circling back to is Altus and then neurology.
Gotcha. Well, hey, yeah, I mean, I definitely see the industry going that way, and being ahead of the curve is really going to help. You know, sometimes when people look at you funny for some things, you know, you're probably headed in the right direction where everybody's probably going to realize it, you know, here in the next 10, 15 years, especially. So, well, Coach, man, I appreciate you coming on. If anybody has any questions, especially with like your speed systems or, you know, your return to play, you may have some coaches that have some questions about, you know, hey, how do I adjust to a hamstring issue? How do I adjust to a quad injury? And if they want to get in touch with you, how would you prefer they do that?
Social media is usually best. I'm disgustingly on it, probably a little too much. Both my X and Instagram are at Kyle Jacksic, so KyleJacksic. And then my personal email is my first and last name at gmail.com. So same as the Instagram at gmail.com. I'll probably answer you on social media first, just because I'm usually, if it's an email, I'm going to type way too much. Or social media, everything's usually a little bit quicker.
Yeah, good deal. Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate you coming on, and thanks for sharing all the value, man.
You got it. I appreciate it.